My name is Rose William, and I am a 45-year-old teacher in Georgia. What I'm about to share with you is my near-death experience story of what transpired when Jesus showed me the heartbreaking truth about the actual origins of Black people. I truly encountered and witnessed something that dramatically transformed my understanding of Black people, their history, and their connection to the holy. But before we begin, please let me know where you are watching from. It will be great to feel closer, regardless of how we're physically apart. Additionally, don't forget to like and comment on what you feel about this near-death experience testimony. Let us have a free and honest discussion, so we may learn from each other on this channel. It happened on July 4th, 2021. I had been battling with health challenges for months, tired and in pain that had no relation to any one source. My doctors were confused, but it was not until that night that everything came to a head. I remember sitting in the family room, talking with my husband about our children and their homework, when suddenly everything went dark. It's complicated to explain what happened after that. At one point, I was in my house, and the next I was outside of it. I was not in my body anymore. I felt light and weightless. I found myself in a large, illuminated area. It felt as though the whole atmosphere was made of light, glowing, and warm. And there, standing in front of me, was Jesus Christ. He was dressed in stunning white robes, and his eyes stared straight into my soul. I felt love, warmth, and kindness all at once. It was as if all the worry I had ever felt was washed away. I knew at that time that I was in the presence of someone who had all the answers. Jesus was silent at first, but then he spoke calmly, gently. "Welcome, Rose. You're here for a purpose." As I was standing before him, many questions came through my head. But before I could say anything, Jesus began to speak, and in a couple of seconds, he began explaining things that would profoundly change how I perceived the world around me. One of the first things he showed me was the curse of Ham. I had been told the story before. Who hadn't? Growing up in the church, I remember being told that Black people were cursed because of Noah's son, Ham. It was a notion that seemed to make sense to many people, one that people usually use to justify racial injustice and discrimination. But Jesus told me that this was all wrong. "Rose, the curse of Ham has been misinterpreted for centuries," he said. "The curse was never intended to be placed on Black people." I was shocked with my mind trying to keep up with his words. He explained that the curse was not on Ham but on Canaan, the son of Ham. The Bible in Genesis describes Noah being drunk and exposing himself to his sons. When Ham saw his father in that condition and did not cover him, Noah placed a curse not on Ham but on Canaan, Ham's son. Then I saw how the curse placed on Canaan reflects the prophetic word concerning the future descendants of Canaan and the disputes that will arise. This transformed my understanding completely, and I felt an overpowering feeling of clarity as Jesus spoke. The curse was primarily meant for Canaan and not all of the descendants of Ham. It wasn't Black people who were cursed, it was Canaan and the next generation. But somehow, throughout history, the reality has been twisted, and some people have taken advantage of this misconception to back up their own prejudices and cruel beliefs. Jesus told me that the curse was about disobedience and spiritual disappointment and not a racial issue. It was an issue of sin, not skin color. Jesus told me that over time, this disinformation had been firmly embedded in society, resulting in countless years of abuse and discrimination. People had misinterpreted the message, and that misinterpretation had caused massive pain to generations of people. As we were walking together across that wonderful place, Jesus revealed to me the reality about the origins of Black people. I had long believed, like a lot of others, that Black people were either lesser or had been cursed in some manner. But Jesus revealed the supernatural blessing behind the African lineage. "Rose," he said, "you have believed countless false things about the African people, but I am going to reveal to you the reality. The Black people, descendants of Ham, have been misinterpreted, and their true story has been twisted for countless years. It was not about a curse, but about a heavenly plan and blessing." He showed me the value of Ham's descendants, particularly Cush, Mizraim, and Put. Cush, he said, was the ancestor of the ancient African peoples. The person who gave birth to the great kingdom of Cush which thrived alongside Egypt as one of the biggest civilizations of ancient times. Jesus smiled. Their history is not one of disgrace, but of dignity and determination. What impressed me the most was when Jesus explained that the word Cush itself meant black in the biblical context. The word black, he said, was never symbolic of shame. In ancient times, it symbolized beauty, power, and the strength of a nation. He stood around to allow the profundity of his words to sink in. Blackness was not a curse, but a blessed and treasured personality, though it has been misinterpreted over time. Through Jesus, I came to understand that Cush's generations were an important part of the plan God had for mankind. These individuals, he said, were rewarded by God with intelligence, leadership, and supernatural favor. The African nations of Ethiopia, Cush, and Egypt were never cursed. They were inspired by God and chosen for a higher mission in the ancient world. One of the most significant revelations Jesus told me was concerning ancient Egypt. I have always been intrigued by the history and secrets of Egypt. The pyramids, the deities, and the extraordinary accomplishments of the ancient Egyptians have intrigued me ever since I was a child. But I had never fully understood the deeper, heavenly connection Egypt had with the story of Genesis and the ancient peoples of God. Rose, Egypt was never intended to be seen only as an area of bondage, Jesus said. It is a center of civilization, a location where wisdom and understanding are shared with the world. Jesus revealed that Mizraim, one of Ham's sons, was an ancestor of the Egyptians. The Egyptians, he said, were part of the same blessed lineage as Cush. They were a chosen individual who was gifted with tremendous knowledge and wisdom that was eventually handed down to various cultures across the world. Egypt wasn't only a location of enslavement, he said. It was a place of heavenly wisdom, a source of wisdom that was supposed to be shared. The teachings of the pharaohs, the ancient spiritual leaders, were part of my plan for shaping the. Jesus stared at me with empathy. I understand the sorrow you've carried, recognizing Egypt's involvement in the slavery of the Israelites. But the Egyptians, regardless of their fall into idolatry, were once spiritually chosen to pass on wisdom and light to all countries. As I remained there with Jesus, absorbing everything that he told me, I felt something deep shift in my soul. I had spent my life thinking disconnected and uncertain of my place in the world. But Jesus was giving me a new reality, a reality of heavenly heritage that goes back to the beginning of time. He then showed me how the misinterpretations of the Bible and the distortion of realities about race and identity had resulted in centuries of misery, discrimination, and pain. But the moment for healing has arrived, he said. The moment for reality is now. The curse of Ham was never a curse at all. It was a spiritual misconception, a misconception that has been used to silence, distort, and conceal the treasures of Black people's heritage. As Jesus proceeded to take me into that bright zone, the tremendous calm and clarity I felt were unlike anything I had ever known in my worldly existence. The truth was like a salve, mending the scars of my past. He had previously told me the truth about the curse of Ham, how it had been distorted to justify generations of hatred and injustice. But there was still more to uncover, and Jesus, patient as ever, began to guide me further into the mysteries of Black people's holy beginnings. Rose, there is more to the story, he continued. I want you to see the legacy of power, knowledge, and love that was passed down through generations of my people. At that time, he revealed a great fabric of civilizations. Ethiopia, Nubia, Cush, Egypt, and others, all born from the ancestors of Cush. These countries, Jesus said, were important to God's plan for humankind. They played a crucial part in creating the world long before the uncertainty and conflict that would come. I was shown the ancient kingdom of Cush, which flourished along the banks of the Nile River. The inhabitants of Cush were not just powerful in battle, but also wise in spiritual issues. They were stewards of holy wisdom, Jesus said. Their wisdom about creation and the supernatural law of heaven and earth was a gift from God, meant to light up the hearts of all people. I saw artifacts, old shrines, and writing that spoke of a deep and profound relationship with God, one that many individuals today were unaware of. I felt a wave of emotion when I watched the majestic Nubian queens, such as Queen Amenirina's and Queen Makeda, who led their nation with elegance, strength, and dominance. These ladies were not just political leaders, Jesus said, but spiritual leaders. They realized a supernatural calling upon their lives to lead their people with knowledge and compassion. They were beloved in my sight. The kingdom of Egypt, too, stood as a witness to God's supernatural blessing. Jesus told me that the Egyptians, although their later fall into the worship of idols, had been at the vanguard of spiritual and intellectual discovery. Egypt was the foundation of wisdom, he said. It was never meant to be an area of bondage, but a sanctuary where divine wisdom thrived. I witnessed how Moses, the legendary prophet, had been raised in Pharaoh's palace, not by chance but by heavenly intention. Moses was placed in Egypt, Jesus said, to gain insight from the enormous wisdom of the Egyptians. He was appointed to lead my people out, but Egypt, in its earliest days, was destined to be a source of light, a beacon of insight from which many countries would be blessed. What society today calls idolatry in Egypt was once a part of their religious path, Jesus said. They sought to fully understand the supernatural, but they got lost on the way. However, the foundation of this knowledge had its roots in reality. I started seeing how the descendants of Africa spread over the entire globe. The African diaspora, which includes the compelled migration of millions of African people through slavery, was not a random event. It was an aspect of God's bigger plan. I watched how African ancestors carried their knowledge, faith, and perseverance across the world, even in the face of terrible pain. Jesus told me that slavery, one of the worst episodes in human history, was not something God ordered, but instead the outcome of human sin and selfishness. However, despite that sorrow, the African people had brought with them a holy spark, a strong feeling of hope, faith, and determination that could never be destroyed. This heavenly power survived a century of pain, and it was this resilience that made the Black community so strong. Rose, the African nations are not just survivors. They are my soldiers, my descendants, carrying a holy lineage that has been passed down for centuries. Jesus spoke these words with such passion that I felt them deeply in my heart. As I thought about his words, I saw visions of Black spiritual leaders, from abolitionists to human rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., who had been motivated by this divine ignition. These people were not only fighting for independence, but also for justice in harmony with supernatural will. I saw how God was always with the African nation, even in their darkest moments, raising up prophets, leaders, and activists to advocate for his reality and to direct his people toward a better future. Then Jesus guided me to an understanding of African spirituality. I was always intrigued by the spiritual traditions of my ancestors, the ceremonies, the regard for ancestors, and the connection to earth and nature. Jesus revealed to me that these traditions, when kept clean, were not in opposition to God, but were a manifestation of the strong spiritual relationship that the African nation had with the divine. Rose, your ancestors were aware that they were connected to the earth, to the stars, and to all nature. They recognized that the supernatural is in everything and that everything may be used to serve God. Jesus told me how the tradition of honoring ancestors in many African societies was not about honoring the dead, but about respecting the knowledge and sacrifices of people who had come before. Honoring your ancestors, he said, is not about worshiping them but understanding their role in the divine story. It is about remaining in touch with the wisdom and love that endures across generations. I saw images of ancient African rituals when the people danced, sang, and interacted with God through the elements: fire, water, air, and soil. These rites were founded on the belief that God's presence was not restricted to a building or a book, but permeated all of creation. I am present in all things, Jesus said. My presence flows through the ground, the wind, the river, and the fire. The rituals you witnessed were manifestations of the passionate relationship between the Creator and His creation. I acknowledged then that spirituality was not confined to one nation or religion, but was a universal experience. One that can show up in different forms, but always with the same divine foundation. As my experience with Jesus went on, he started to explain to me the challenges and trials that African people, particularly Black Americans, had suffered throughout history. I saw how fighting for freedom and justice was not merely a matter of human effort, but was firmly related to a divine purpose. one that had been prophesied and predetermined by God. "Rose," Jesus said, "the struggle of the Black people is not only a struggle for human rights, it is a battle of spirit. It is a struggle for the regaining of heavenly truth and justice on earth. Their struggle is a struggle for self-worth, respect, and a legitimate place that has always been theirs in my kingdom. They are my children, and I have heard their cries." This revelation was overwhelming. It meant that the sorrow, pain, and injustice faced by Black people were not in vain. They were part of a bigger, cosmic fight for justice and the truth. The African American community's struggle for fairness was not only a political or cultural movement, it was a spiritual call. God had seen the wickedness and was using this community to bring changes to the world. I was told that the strength of the Black community, from the determination of African slaves to the civil rights movements, was a sign of God's divine plan. These struggles, although terrible, were part of God's plan for restoring truth, love, and harmony to the entire world. I came to understand the integral part of the African people in God's plan of salvation. Jesus said the challenges encountered by Black people were a testimony to the world, a testimony of how the holy spark inside them had never been destroyed, even in the face of powerful adversity. "Rose, the return of my people will come at a moment of enormous awakening. The reality about their identity and purpose will be exposed to the world, and with it will come a moment of healing and harmony." I was shown a vision of the coming back of Jesus, where he would come to bring peace, equality, and healing to all individuals, particularly to the Black community. The reality about their heavenly origin would no longer be concealed. The world will ultimately see the blessing that had been misinterpreted for a long time. As I started to go back to my earthly body, I felt a deep feeling of tranquility and gratitude. The supernatural heritage of the Black community was not something to be ashamed of or concealed. It was a holy gift, one that had been passed down through generations, and one that was going to keep shining as a light of hope, strength, and divine intention. When I eventually woke up in the hospital, I was changed. The doctors told me that I had been clinically dead for almost 11 minutes, but I knew I had encountered something that could never be described by science alone. I saw the divine scheme evolve before me, and most of all, I was shown the kindness and compassion of Jesus, who revealed to me the true and holy position of the Black community in the story of the kingdom of God. If you're watching this, I want you to understand that what I experienced was not just for me, but for all of us. The reality revealed to me is that Black communities are not cursed. They are spiritually chosen, with an incredible heritage of strength, knowledge, and purpose. Our challenges are part of a larger spiritual conflict, but in the end, restoration and recovery will arrive. If you're Black, understand that you are part of something deeper. You are loved, chosen, and influential. And if you're from other origins, the message of unity and healing is for you too. Together, we can restore the world through compassion and love.